Yeah, a little bit of an introduction before I get into the session. I'm Dharani Karthikeyan. I'm working with SAP Labs for the past 18 years or so, and I have more than 2 decades of experience in building enterprise software. I've been predominantly working on different technologies, starting from search engine, middleware, orchestration, and the last 6 to 7 years, I've been specializing in the analytics. Again, in the analytics space, I started from the on-prem and transformed into the cloud analytics. And I'm currently heading the engineering globally for SAP's analytics cloud platform. Yeah. So with my experience, I've got all these years, I'm going to share some of my thoughts and also some of the work that we are currently doing with a lot of other customers to explain the need of the unified data and analytics platform and how we can bring in augmented analytics and embeddable PI into different organizations so that the businesses are able to take a data-driven approach on real-time data. So let me get into the next slide. So before we get into the details of the integrated data and analytics framework, let's understand the kind of a complexity that we have in each of the organization. As you see here, every organization have multiple data landscape. There is no one organization which specializes or points down into one data platform. In reality, they all have multiple data landscapes spread across different LOBs of an organization. And part of the reason why they are getting into this complex landscape is because of historical reasons, but also majority of the cases, every LOB tries and tends to pick up point-based solutions in order to solve their use case without thinking holistically. Because of this kind of behavior from the organizations and different departments, every organization will mostly end up in such a complex and an unintegrated data landscape. And because of which, if you look at the IT administrators or the data and analytics officer for every organization, most of the time they spend in order to grapple with the whole situations, and also they put their most efforts, first of all, to discover the data, persist the data, and harmonize the data, because that itself is a huge work. And this kind of a complexity literally hinders them to get good business insights, do prediction, and also automate using AI. And with this complexity, there is also another perspective that the data in the organization is growing every day and every moment in an exponential manner. If I really look at the amount of data which is generated in the entire digital atmosphere in the world, according to IDC survey, by 2025, we are going to have 175 zettabytes of data generated. And just to put this into context, one zettabyte is 10 to the power of 21. Yeah? That's a kind of a amount of data the entire world is now dealing with, and so is with every organization. This kind of a huge data combined with this complex landscape is just a nightmare for any data and analytics officer in an organization. Yeah? And that is when it's also very, very important that they have a very cohesive strategy put in across different departments in order to unify this landscape. And typically what also happens is that most of the time organizations tend to recruit a lot of data analysts, and the data analyst spends weeks and months together in order to discover the data, to create harmonization and a semantic layer around the data, and then end up creating simple reports. And most often when these reports reach a business user, it doesn't meet their requirement, or syntactically or semantically, it's not meeting their requirements and their business need. And because of which the businesses are tending to lack the trust on the insights that's coming from this complex data landscape. Yeah. And another challenge that the organizations are actually facing is that a lot of these data end up being in different silos. If you look at the left side where we have the green shoots, it's because the data on the left side has got the business context. Anytime anyone pulls out the data from the application and the business context, the value of the data becomes really less. And that's when it's important that the organization really bridge the gap between the data which the business context and also the data which is sitting on separate data lakes, because those literally produce very few value because it doesn't lack the semantics. So it's important that the organizations are able to put in the data integration tools so that every data is kind of connected and also has a business context, which in turn produces good insights. Yeah. And again, so some of the challenges that's there for most of the data and analytics leaders in the organization is that, first of all, getting a unified and a governed view of the data coming from this complex and the unintegrated landscape. And the reality is that even though there are so many software vendors, many of them are not integratable at all. And what is currently happening is the organization is spending a lot of time becoming a system integrated between those software vendors and trying to integrate, while the software vendors itself should have a good platform in order to integrate these complex data landscape. And as I mentioned, typically valuable business context is lost once the data is extracted from the application. And I've seen with my experience working with a lot of customers, even though customers would want the businesses not to extract data, but typically what happens is they extract the data from the data source, put it on an Excel, and share that Excel with multiple users within the organization. Once they do that, first of all, the context is lost, and also the governance around this data is lost. This kind of a multiple copies floating around the organization is not definitely a secured way. And also, for a data which is coming from the finance system, it's just too dangerous to do that, right? So most of the time, the challenge for the analytics leader is to make sure that the users are not extracting data from the application, and also put in a good amount of governance and the self-services for the business so that it's easier for them to get the insights from the data directly from the source instead of having multiple copies. And another important challenge which most of the organizations are facing is that they would have spent a lot of efforts in the previous decades putting their data and the application on the on-prem, and most of them are now transitioning to the cloud. Now, the analytics software that they are now working with should be able to not just connect with the cloud data, but also on-prem data so that the existing investment are still leveraged. Right? So that's when, in order to address all these challenges, we really have to think of a data value pyramid. And when I talk about the data value pyramid, the organization has to be aware that they will have to put in enough systems and processes in place so that they are able to handle the kind of a volume and the variety of the data which is there in the organization. They should be able to bring in good semantics and also good quality of the data, so that when the end users or the business users are picking up the data, they have a good amount of trust on the data and are able to get good insights and are able to use. Once you put in these tools and address these things, then the value of the insights that you're getting from the data is going to be exponential. Now, if you look at the personas who has to make sure that this data to value pyramid is working well, a big part of the persona is actually from the IT, and the next part is the business. So when we look at the IT department, they will have to definitely choose the system and the software and the landscape so that the heterogeneous data is being able to be handled. So when I talk about heterogeneous data, very often the data is coming from different data sources, like I talked about the cloud data sources, on-prem data sources. Many of the time the data is structured, semi-structured, unstructured, social media data, streaming data, IoT, right? You have a variety of data which is being generated in your organization, and the systems that you put in should be able to handle all sorts of data. Yeah. And then once you have this data, which has been now connected into one single landscape, you should also be able to have a good security and a governance model around the data. You should be able to provide role-based access so that the data reaches the right person, and also should be able to have a good amount of semantics, because very often the data which is there in the databases or in the application does not mean a lot for the business users. So that's when you should have a strong semantic layer on top of the data, so that when the business user connects to the data, they're able to understand the data and gain insights on top of that. Yeah. And once you have this kind of a system that is set up, then the businesses can come in and make use of the data and have self-services in order to create their own reports, get their insights, and also able to use those insights in their day-to-day job in order to make a better decision-making process. Yeah. And again, the data democratization is going to be important, and that is provided with the pyramid that I talked about. But also, let's look into each and every step in those pyramid. First and foremost, like I talked about, we should be able to provide a data integration by providing connectivity to different data sources. Again, you should also be aware any software is not going to give you an out-of-box connectivity for all the other software in the world. So the software and the system that you pick up should be able to also give you a custom building capabilities in order to connect to custom sources or even your homegrown sources. So that's something which is very important when we talk about the data integration. And most of the time, you don't want to also be replicating the data. So the system should also be able to be replicating as well as federating the data which is really important, probably that you want to use often with a very high speed. You can look at replication, but for the data that you might be wanting to blend or get on demand, then you can look at federating. Yeah, and I also talked about it's not just important that we connect to the data, you should also be able to inherit the semantics of those data from the data sources, so that when you look into the data, you're not looking just at the DB tables or the views, but you're also associating the semantics around those data. Now, once you have the data integration available in your system, you should also look at a data storage strategy. When you have a data storage strategy, again, look, one thing which is very important is that the volume is going to be huge. So you should have a good data tiering strategy. When I talk about the data tiering strategy, look at the data that needs to be at the hot cache, warm cache, and the cold cache. Typically, if you see, there are a lot of customers who have terabytes of data which is there in their organization, but what gets really used on a day-to-day basis is just few MBs. So those are the MBs of the data will go into in-memory and into the hot cache so that it can be accessed very fast. And then you should look at the next level of data going to the warm cache, and probably the data that you're going to use least will go into your cold cache and your data lakes. And this kind of a data tiering strategy will help you to get a better TCO in an organization. And once you have the data storage and the strategy put in, you should also look at the data cataloging, which is basically a catalog for all the metadata of the data which is there in your organization. Because typically, again, you saw the matrix and the complexity in the first slide, which also means the discovery of the data is very, very complex. That's when you should have a strong catalog which lists all this data which is available. And the catalog also should be able to tell you the data lineage of the data that is coming in. Typically, what happens, the data gets morphed by the time you look into the data. So you should be at any point of time, we understand the lineage and understand the source of the data it's coming from. And once you have the catalog, you should be able to connect to the catalog, discover, and do the data preparation, because most of the time the data quality will not be at the right mark so that you can consume it directly. So that's when the data cleansing and the data transformation is important. And once you have the data cleansed and prepared, you should be able to create a good semantic modeling on top of the data. And then once you have that model, share the data into your data marketplace or provide a role-based access so that the entire business is able to access the right data that they require at the right time. And once you have the data prepared in this manner, then you can apply analytics and planning onto this data so that you're able to report based on your data and also plan for your future as well. right? And some of the reasons why we really have to look at this integrated analytics suite is that you should be able to not just analyze and create reports, which is more like a traditional analytics system, which is being used by most of the organization, but it is also important that the analytics software that you use in your organization is just not able to analyze and create reports, because that's mostly it's synonym to looking into a rear view mirror. But you should also be able to predict what's going to happen in your businesses and also plan accordingly. And the software should also be able to connect live into your data sources without really replicating all the data to your analytics software. And you should also have enough automated insights, which is powered by machine learning, so that the businesses can trust the insights coming in from the system and make confident decision. And you should also be able to share your insights easily with other people. Yeah. And let me just give you a small example of a financial analytics dashboard. And this is a dashboard that we've delivered. And what is important in this kind of a dashboard is that for a CFO kind of a personality, they can come into the dashboard and have the data which is coming in from HR system as well as the financial system. This is something what we call as a cross analytics dashboard. And in this case, if you look at it, the CFO will be able to see the cost per department, drill down into each of the department, and he can also look into the employee analysis and understand how many headcounts are there per cost center and what are the open positions and how is it compared against the budget for the open position, right? So it gives a very clear indication for a CFO, and it pulls in data from different systems in order to provide this holistic view. Yeah, again, this is just an example, and we have you can create your own dashboard. But have in mind that the dashboard should be able to get data from multiple systems and give you a holistic view. Yeah, and having said that, let me also kind of talk about what is augmented analytics, right? So first of all, this term has been coined by Gartner. It refers to the paradigm in which the machine learning is being used to automate the data preparation and the insight discovery. Like I talked about in the previous slide, the data preparation and the entire data integration activity is quite complex, and it's also time consuming. But then when you use the machine learning to automate some of these processes, then it's called augmented analytics. Yeah. And some of the features, augmented analytics features, which is typically available in many of the analytics software, is that a natural language querying of the data. Just like you converse with your friend or your colleague, you can also converse with naturally in your own language with the data in order to get the results. And in many cases, we also use machine learning algorithm to analyze the patterns and detect outliers and give the answers and the data and the insights that users are not really querying for directly. I'll give you an example. So as a sales manager, when I'm looking at the sales data and I'm looking at a chart which shows the sales over multiple regions, the system will automatically find out related dimensions. It will probably tell me, hey, your sales in North America has been peaking for the last 4 quarters because a particular division in North America is actually over exceeding their budget by 200% every quarter, right? So these are the kind of a deep pattern that the system can analyze on its own and give you those insights so that you can then take your business decisions on. Another powerful example is also to apply predictive algorithms to predict your potential outcomes. Now, as a sales manager, when I'm looking at the sales for the previous quarters, it can automatically tell me how my sales is going to be in the future quarters as well. Yeah? So these are some of the powerful augmented BI features that could be used in your organizations. And just a depiction, and this is something that we are currently working on within our labs as well. So where you can really type in your questions, and when you type in your question, it gives you the details automatically without having to create a dashboard. You can just ask the question, it'll give you the details, and you can explore the data further by ad hoc analysis. And then when you want to have a lot more deeper analysis, then you can work with the dashboard. Yeah, so the range of the business users starts from casual, because as a casual business user, I can start interacting with the data just like how I interact with any social media software. And then I get into more details in the specific reports as and when my business demands. Um, so I just wanted to talk about a couple of other trends that the Gartner is looking at when we talk about the analytics. I talked about the augmented analytics, but then currently it's also about the decision intelligence. One thing which is very clear is now organizations are moving away from business intelligence, but into the decision intelligence, so that we bring in people, tools, and data together to create the decisions that is required to move forward our business. So that's something, that's a terminology that you will keep hearing. And also the composability. Like I talked about in the first slide, an organization practically has n number of analytical and the data tools. Now it's important for the tools to be in a composable manner, so that when you create an application, you have a composable architecture, so that you bring in analytical components and insights from different tools, so that you have a 360-degree view of the entire business and create a compelling application. Again, so composable BI is something, is another upcoming paradigm which every organizations are looking at. Yeah. So I don't know how we are looking at from the time. Kyle, can you help me to let me know how many minutes we have?
Yeah, I think you're okay for a couple of minutes, Dharani.
Okay. Perfect. So I will take this opportunity to show you a quick demo of an analytics which is seamlessly embedded into a business user workflow. And this is again coming from our SAP system, but I'm sure you'll be able to relate to some of the systems that you have in your place for your organizations as well. So like I talked about, it's important that these insights are embedded in the right place into a workflow. In this case, I'm a sales manager. I'm entering into my launch pad, and I want to look at the disputes that's happening across different customers. So in this, I'll be able to open the dispute dashboard, and I should be able to drill down per country, per region, to understand how my customers are able to do across different regions. And what's important is that I should also be able to get the context of the data I'm looking at. For example, in this case, I look at the first customer. I want to understand the details. I can just do a right click. Yeah. I will do a right click, and in this case, you see that there's a jump to target, and it displays all the functionalities that I can do on a customer, and I can get into each of those kind of a transactions or the application, which will in turn gives me details for that particular customers. In this case, for example, if I go into a company code and do a right click, it doesn't show me the same menu. It understands that I right clicked on a company code, and then when I do a jump to, it shows the jump to navigations that is only relevant for the company code. So in this case, for example, I'm getting into the display of the customer balance for the customer, and you would see automatically the application of displaying the balance opens up, but at the same time, it's also filtered with the context I'm looking for, right? So that you're able to take the decisions for that customer, and then you can comfortably go back in the same user experience, go back into analytics report that you started with, and you should be able to see at the same state that you were in earlier. So this is just a small showcase of what the power of an embedded BI into an end user application. And if you're able to embed these analytics seamlessly into your end user application, then the user doesn't even realize that he's moving between transactional system and analytical system. He has just one system which gives him a 360-degree views, which in turn makes him, it gives him the best decision intelligence system as well.
Nice. Excellent. Great presentation, Dharani. Thank you very much. Does the audience have any questions on this topic for Dharani? An awful lot covered there, blown my mind, Dharani. I'm not a technologist, so I was trying to keep up the best I could, but very impressive. I think one thing that I will ask you, I guess more from a business perspective, is as you very rightly said, right? Every business is now looking at how can they democratize their data. as you've shown us, that is a lot more difficult in reality than just saying it out loud, right? As with everything in our industry, obviously the integrations between different softwares and the whole technology landscape that plays with that. If you were to give us kind of your top 3 tips on what people should be thinking about for their organizations in terms of getting this right, what would they be?
Yeah. I think the first and foremost, like I talked about, just acknowledging the kind of a complexity that the organization in is itself is a big step, right? Most of the times I've seen that the customers do not understand the complexity, and they just take a pointed use case and go ahead and implement. That use case would work well, but then if they want to expand to other use cases, it just breaks, right? So just understand the landscape and put up your top priorities for your businesses and the use cases that you need to solve. Think of it holistically and then start implementing it, right? So do that kind of a understanding in the assessment phase before you jump into implementation, because that's going to then set yourself for success for many, many years.
Yeah, perfect. Well, Dharani, I think that's everything we need from you. Thank you very, very much. Excellent presentation.